Hello, I'm the 10-minute English teacher. Let's get you exam ready. Today we're going to be revising Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare, looking at the Juliet quotes, "You must know." Okay, so here's a Juliet action trail. You might want to pause and then just see if you can fill in these gaps. What actually happens? What are the key moments involving Juliet in the play? So when it comes to the exam, if you were asked to write about Juliet, she was named in the question, you'd probably be wanting to write about 8 or 9 key moments. So the first time we meet Juliet, you'll see there, she speaks to her mother and the nurse about marrying Paris. And at the very end, of course, she takes her own life, which is what we find out in the prologue. So what happens in the run-up to that? If you want to take part in that activity, pause now, see what you can remember from the play. Otherwise, we're about to have a look at those key moments. Okay, so here are the key moments. Juliet speaks to her mother and the nurse about marrying Paris, which is something that Capulet's spoken to Paris about. And then we've got the ball. Juliet meets Romeo. Now, she's an Elizabethan girl, or a representation of Elizabethan girl. She wouldn't have had a life outside of the home. She wouldn't have had friendships with people like Romeo. So it is chance, it's fluke, it's a bit of bad luck or good luck, whichever way we want to see it, that she ends up meeting Romeo. Ordinarily, she would have been happy in that arrangement to marry Paris. So she meets Romeo at the ball. At the end of the ball, Romeo listens to Juliet speaking to herself at the balcony, and then they speak to each other about marriage. The nurse speaks to Romeo about his intentions, and he says that he wants to marry Juliet, and then she goes back and tells Juliet the news. So the nurse is setting up that marriage for Romeo and Juliet. She doesn't have any children of her own, and she's got a good close relationship with Juliet. And here she sort of acts like a parent to Juliet, but it's not her place to do that. Then after that, they are married. And Juliet hears from the nurse that Romeo has killed Tybalt. So she's really confused. She loves Romeo, but she's also angry that he's been responsible for killing her cousin, who she's really close to. She doesn't have any brothers and sisters, all that sort of stuff. And then after secretly spending the night with Romeo, the nurse helps Romeo to get into Juliet's bedroom to spend the night with her. Romeo disappears to Mantua, and then at that moment he leaves, and then Capulet arrives. Lady Capulet comes first, and then Capulet pops in to talk to her about the idea of her marrying Paris. She says she doesn't want to, and there is a massive bit of a confrontation between her and Capulet. He's not happy. So she runs straight off to Friar Lawrence and says, "What am I going to do? I'd rather die than marry Paris." And he's got an absolutely cracking idea. "Let's give you some potion that will make you look like you're dead. You won't be dead. We'll get you in your coffin in the monument where your family are buried, and then the potion will wear off. I'll come down there, get you out of there, and you can go and live in Mantua with Romeo, and your mum and dad will just think you're dead, which will be great." So that's his wonderful, brilliant plan, which clearly is flawed from the beginning and doesn't work out. At the end, Juliet wakes up thinking that she's going to be awoken by Friar Lawrence to get her to Romeo, but when she wakes up, she finds a dead Romeo next to her, and then she takes her own life. So that's what happens involving Juliet in Romeo and Juliet. So those are the key moments. Now, there are 2 ways of looking at Juliet, and if you want to be aiming for the higher bands in the assessment, or rather the examination, or in your mock assessment, whichever one it is you're about to do or going to do, showing that you can understand there's 2 different ways of looking at Juliet is certainly something you need to include in your response. That's showing an alternative interpretation. It's good to do that with some of the quotes, showing different things that quotes might communicate, but also looking at different ways we can look at a character is going to help you access those higher bands. So there are 2 ways of looking at Juliet. We can see her as a free spirit, misunderstood by parents who don't understand true love. But we can also see her as impulsive and ignorant, and a young girl who's ungrateful and doesn't really think about her parents and the amount of work and effort they've put into trying to secure her a prosperous future with Paris, which would have been their role, and it would have been expected of her to have respected her parents' decisions. Elizabethans might have been a little bit more empathetic towards Capulet. They might have sided with him. Now, a girl of Juliet's class, she's a wealthy girl. She wouldn't have had a life outside of her family, and her future would have been decided by her parents. So here are key quotes for Juliet. You can have a look for a couple more. I'm sure you do know a couple more of your own. Ultimately, if you were aiming for a 9 in the examination, the average 9 uses around 9 quotes, considering you've got to say some really interesting things and provide that analysis. So here are some that I think are really worth knowing for Juliet. Top left-hand corner, we've got, I'll look to like if looking liketh move. So she speaks alliteratively and in iambic pentameter to show her sort of strength of mind. She's quite assertive here with her mother. She's saying, I want the experience of falling in love. And now ordinarily, that would have probably been the case with her meeting Paris, but she meets Romeo, and that confuses things. So that's what happens there right at the beginning. That's when we first meet Juliet. And then after she's married, just underneath there, we've got take him and cut him out in little stars, and he shall make the face of heaven so fine. Now, this is Juliet talking to herself as she's waiting for Romeo to turn up after they've been married. And it's quite interesting. We've got stars there. They're an image that we associate with fate and chance. So that theme of bad fortunes being introduced there. And we've also got the face of heaven. So anytime we've got anything to do with heaven and that sort of business, we can talk about dramatic irony. Shakespeare's constantly reminding us, don't get too excited. She's going to do herself in at the end. So we've got that dramatic irony here. But we've also got her sort of worshipping Romeo. It's a religious audience. Elizabethan England was a very, very religious society. So the audience, hearing Juliet almost worshipping Romeo with this religious language, they might have seen that as quite sinful. The fact that she's almost worshipping him and not God. So Juliet, her demise at the end, where it all goes wrong, maybe the Elizabethan audience would have been less sympathetic towards her. Just underneath the title there, we've got bid me leap from the battlements of any tower rather than marry Paris. This is what she says to Friar Lawrence, and it's reminding us of her, her desire to end her own life. So it's just, again, reminding us of the structure of the play, the fact that we're heading towards their deaths. But it's also quite melodramatic, over the top. So it's certainly a moment that's quite interesting in that respect. If you want to sound really clever, we've got that verb, bid, right at the beginning. So that's foregrounded. And at the beginning of the play, when Romeo's talking about his feelings for Rosaline, he says, bid a sad man in sickness make his will. So he thinks that his feelings for Rosaline, are so strong that he doesn't want to live either. So Shakespeare might be linking these two moments up just to show us that adolescents, young people, can be quite impulsive and melodramatic. We've got on the right of that quote, I swear it should be Romeo, who I know you hate, rather than Paris. So she's actually married to Romeo at this point, where Capulet comes in to speak to her about his plans for her to get married. And she says that to him. So she just wants to hurt her father. It doesn't show a high level of maturity from Juliet. She speaks in all this poetic language when she speaks to Romeo, but she's a lot ruder to her father, which certainly we can see that as quite disrespectful. She consummates her marriage in his home, which ultimately is quite disrespectful. There's two ways of us looking at her. We see her as this loving, passionate, poetic person who is not understood by anybody, or we can see her as this quite insolent, ignorant, naive, childish character as well. She says, I have bought the mansion of a love and not possessed it. This is why she's waiting for Romeo to come and spend the night with her. And this metaphor is really interesting because we've got an image of a mansion here. She says, I've bought the mansion of a love and not possessed it. I feel like I've bought a big house, but I haven't been in there yet. And this image of the mansion is really interesting because it's reminding us of where she is. She's in her parents' house. It's like Shakespeare wants us to remember that she's disrespecting her parents by marrying Romeo and by consummating her marriage in their home. And then bottom left, we've got the last quote. It's not something that Juliet says, but it's at the end when she's dead. Somebody, as they lead others down to where the bodies are, says, this is the place where the torches doth burn. And when Romeo meets Juliet for the first time, he says, oh, she doth teach the torches to burn bright. So this idea of the torch and the burning torch, you could argue that Shakespeare's borrowing that little image from the time that they fell in love and just reminding us of that right at the end, just to make her death a little bit more tragic. And we've also got that motif of fire there with the idea of burning, the idea that these were burning characters that burned with passion, but were also really impulsive and acted without thinking about consequences. So those are some really great key quotes for you to learn, and think carefully about how you can use those to link to other moments in the play or to compare to other characters. They're really, really effective, and you can use them in lots of different circumstances in the examination. Okay, check out my other videos on my channel. I'll continue to add content, and feel free to ask if there's something you'd like to see me cover in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and keep revising.